who hasn't heard me speak before? Amazing, okay, because there's a gimmick I use, which some of you will have heard, so this is great. Now, last year, my talk was about rewriting the narrative around accessible housing. And for me, rewriting the narrative is my radical act. It's been looking at what I perceive as a challenge and saying, okay, well, we can do hard things, leaning into it and making it relatable. I think, is there a clicker? Yes. But this year, Linda's asked me to talk more about process, i.e., how have I set about solving the issues that I've set myself up to solve, and so that other people can learn from them. And in some ways, I find this quite difficult because I love the narrative piece, like everything flows from this narrative. And disability can be quite a challenging space. It spooks a lot of people. It kind of, people feel very frightened of getting it wrong or being exposed for getting it wrong. And when I'm working with people, I make absolutely certain that that isn't a concern because I get it wrong. I only know about me and my disability. So I want to share with you a few stories about what I've been doing. And a bit of a spoiler alert right at the beginning. I want you to keep in mind these two words, relatability and champions, because they underpin everything that I do. We create change together, and champions are essential to opening doors, and people become champions when they relate to something, quite often with my work, something they haven't related to before now. And I collaborate best with those people who understand the opportunities that living in a safe and decent home unlock for all of us. And it's really nice because actually, through all the talks over the last 2 days, people have been mentioning those opportunities, they've been mentioning decent homes, and they've also been talking about accessible homes. And that's new. Like last year when I spoke, that was, I felt like a lone voice. So now I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And what I'm going to do is ask you all to stand up. I'm going to ask these 4 questions. If you can answer a question positively, you get to sit down and you can stay sitting down. So my first question, excluding me and the other 2 wheelchair users in this conference, if you know a wheelchair user or parents with a disabled child, sit down. If you know someone with a degenerative condition, could be arthritis, stroke, multiple sclerosis, dementia, motor neuron disease, muscular dystrophy, sit down. Come on, you guys are making it easy for me. If you know someone aging or with greater care needs, could be a parent, grandparent, sit down. Okay, I haven't even made it to my 4th question, and everyone's sitting down, so you can look around. This is relevant to everyone here. And now I want you to imagine that person unable to move around their own home freely. And that might mean they can't bath or put their kids to bed. It might mean that they soiled themselves because they couldn't get to the bathroom quickly enough or independently. It might mean they don't get work because they can't get up and out independently. But probably they feel a burden because their lack of autonomy means they can't contribute to their families and communities in ways we take for granted. Now, my key message here on this kind of exercise is that this is about their home environment and not about their condition. But it will likely be the difference between mental well-being and mental ill health. So I set up Accessible PRS at the start of 2020, and this turned out to be an amazing time to start a business like mine, because video calls became the norm, and in the following few years, we completely rethought what our homes meant to us. Additionally, we also began to have greater empathy with what a home or lack of a decent home might mean to other people, particularly those who are already marginalized. And what I also noticed is that property professionals were now happy to schedule a call and discuss accessibility and inclusion. Some were already aware, already with the concept, just wanting to know they wanted help to know what they could do about it within their existing constraints, or what they perceived as their existing constraints. And others were aware that this was a subject that reasonably demanded an hour of their time, even though they showed up with a mental checklist of the barriers to doing anything. But by my coming in with a new and pragmatic narrative, doors opened. Even when this didn't lead to immediate action, it started a conversation. And people seem to need two things. One, a narrative related to what they already knew to be true. And two, a solution that is workable and critically keeps property experts as property experts. So let me give you an example of this. So I was pitching for work with a third sector housing organization, and given the nature of their housing objectives, so this was kind of retirement homes, older homes, it seemed to me an absolute no-brainer that they would incorporate accessible design consultancy into their design team and project. However, there is an assumption that architects know everything, even though they hire other contractors such as M&E, engineers, M&E consultants, and sound engineers. And I could tell that accessibility work here was actually not a given. However, our conversation pivoted after I told a story an architect friend of mine had told me the day before about a project he was working on with a community-led housing group. And he said he'd been talking to them, and he'd had me, annoyingly, sitting on his shoulder saying, "What about accessibility?" Now, the project was community-led, it was short lets, it was kind of in a wooded setting. And at first, they hadn't really been convinced that accessibility was it going to happen? It wasn't really necessary. It wasn't something they particularly wanted to pay for. But my architect friend persisted. And long story short, implementing inclusion brought them some surprising wins. First, that in designing modular wet rooms, they'd actually made designing other elements of the house much easier. The second was that in creating accessible pathways through the woods to the homes, they'd actually created just enough space for a very small telehandler to also go through the woods, which meant that they saved costs on delivering the project. Their construction phase took less time. And that was all before they realized that if anyone within the community had an accident or an injury, they wouldn't actually have to leave the community because their existing homes were not accessible, but now they could manage, whether it would be a transitional home or a permanent home and a swap over, they could stay part of that community. And once they saw it, they were actually quite excited about that prospect. Now, as I was telling this story, the potential client remembered that 20 years ago, he'd been working as a railway engineer, and they'd had an ex-RAF serviceman working on the team who was a wheelchair user. And so in the process of making the trackside, I think it was somewhere to London, make it possible for him to work with them, they had realized that it was much easier to deliver the trackside maintenance for everyone. And so in this pitch, the point was he already knew about accessibility being easier. He'd just forgotten it or hadn't made the link or kept the link. And that relatability changed everything, and we got the work. A third element that has been crucial to me in ensuring that solutions I offer keep property professionals remaining experts in property, not disability. And this is actually pretty easy to do, and it's a super positive entry point that takes people on a kind of further down the journey, and they start imagining what they could do off their own back. They don't need me to help with that. And this is often once they've seen the commercial upsides. So this photo here is my star client, Knight Frank. They don't have window stickers, but their champions within the team decided that it'd be really good to really promote the fact that they're working hard on inclusion and accessibility. So I get a sticker in every window, which is amazing for such a small business like mine. Now, there are different benefits to inclusion, and as a suggestion, when you build an accessible home and it's occupied by someone who doesn't have those accessibility needs, run a post-occupation evaluation survey and ask them, how do you get on with the space? How do you live? What do you like about the property? And how is it different from previous properties that you live in? And what you'll very quickly discover is how beneficial these spaces are, or the thoughtfulness in design, and what a difference it makes to people's lives, people who aren't disabled. And it's the same where you deliver inclusion in a work setting. Check in periodically and see what's working for them, and then share these successes elsewhere. So a lot of what I do is about kind of a bit of educating, and then capturing the feedback and sharing it and boosting those benefits. I've noticed that people are keen to update their own processes when they know that a competitor is benefiting ahead of them. So one of our jobs, my job, is really to understand and to describe the wider benefits of inclusion and making it relatable to decision makers. A lot of it is about listening rather than campaigning and broadcasting our own views or knowledge set. And so we have to change the narrative that says in housing, well, when we put in inclusion or accessibility, it's only about those wheelchair users. And like a really, really simple example is that I live with a partner and kids, so that's 4 of us who need accessible housing, not just me. And clearly, you know, like in a family setting, that's really important to the lives of the children. So when I set up, naively, perhaps optimistically, I thought I'd be a link between supply and demand and simply bridge that gap and charge a fee for it, and how wrong I was. Instead, I spent my first year banging my head against a wall and understanding that the things that weren't working, they could never work. So my question to myself became, what do I need to do to catalyze change and inclusion in housing? And my first answer is in thinking bigger, like much bigger, and being clear with myself and others about focusing on these 3 objectives for change. So I needed to increase the supply of wheelchair accessible housing at scale in the UK. I needed to level the processes, the search processes, so that older and disabled people can find suitable homes using all the same portals and channels as anyone else would use. And third, I've spoken about was rewriting the narrative so that property professionals understand the critical relevance and the commercial benefits that inclusion brings. And these are all intrinsically linked. So I continuously ask, like I'm like a child, I have that natural curiosity. I like to understand, why don't things work, and how can I join them, and what needs to be true to create that change? For me, it's important to understand whether the reasons I'm giving for things that don't work are a misconception or a flawed system. You know, do I need to change a mindset, or do I need to join some dots? Or, on that case, do I need to think bigger and actually create a new system? So there are like 1,000 reasons why people tell me it isn't possible for them to build wheelchair accessible homes. And hearing it, like, it's a bit tedious and it's a bit demoralizing, but actually it's incredibly helpful as it guides my work direction. I'm used to understanding that I need to keep going round in circles. So each time I go round a circle, I gather more information and more relationships, and then, you know, I sort of deliver out more solutions or answers as I go round. And always my question is, what needs to be true for X or Y to happen? And which are the organizations that can supply what I need while solving that housing agenda issue that they have? So different organizations have different priorities and constraints. And another thing I've found is that, especially with large organizations, a no from one person does not constitute a no, or it certainly doesn't to me. I just need to keep going round and find a different way in. And that largely comes back to champions. When I find a champion within an organization, such as Knight Frank, it is phenomenal what happens. There is will out there is desire. We just have to tap in the right places. And seemingly this is a radical act, though it kind of seems very logical to my mind. So understanding that house building is a very fast-paced and relentless treadmill for those people on it. Private house builders, local authorities and housing associations and third sector organizations, yes, they all have different constraints, but they also have like different superpowers and abilities to get things done. Very often in ways they haven't worked out for themselves. They need an outlier to come in with a different perspective and help them recognize it for themselves. So with over 400,000 wheelchair users in the UK living in unsuitable houses, there's 1.2 million wheelchair users in the UK, every opportunity to create an accessible home, so we talk about scale, but you know, the micro level is also important, is important to act on. And it only takes a little bit of insight to make this happen. So let me give you a very small example. I have I'd been chatting with a professional landlord for a year, and she had this opportunity to buy a house that had previously been lived in by a wheelchair user. Sadly, the wheelchair user, they had a condition which progressed and they needed to move into a residential care setting. But the landlord knew the owner, knew they would want a nice follow-up story, and so came to ask me, you know, what can we do? Now, a lot of people ask me, what kind of properties do you need? And I avoid specifics because I think they're unhelpful. This was a mid-Victorian terrace, which you would think wouldn't work, but there was already a through-floor lift in the home, and the landlord had to refurbish, and they were a bit worried because there's this belief set that says, if I can't find a tenant a wheelchair user, will the adaptations devalue the property? And I hear this all the time, and I've got lots of answers for why this is not true, but I'm still kind of rewriting that or spreading that narrative. So if anyone wants to know the answer to that, come and ask me afterwards. But to the practical concern to the landlord was that if they had to replace a through-floor lift, that would actually, assuming everything else went okay, that would cost them 9 years' profit, which is a significant undertaking. So coming from a very pragmatic stance, I said, look, first of all, we would find the tenant, and this way we were able to understand what the refurbishment would look like before the landlord had actually completed on the property. And secondly, you know, everyone was involved on the refurbishment discussion. And so it was very pragmatic, it was very transparent, and it was very easy between the three of us. And we each asked questions, and we each listened to the concerns that the other people had. It went very smoothly, and as a result, this graduate was able to accept a really fantastic graduate work scheme offer and move in with their partner, just as anyone else would expect to do kind of in that sort of setting. And the landlord said afterwards, you know, it really wasn't that much different from any other transaction they'd got, and so now is keen to do more of the same. I think what made the difference was knowing at the moment why the bridge between supply and demand doesn't work, and so just being able to slip into that gap and create the solution, you know, found another person a home. And it's also the fact that the landlord was already curious. So one of the lessons I've learned in a positive way is that change does not start with the government. Like, campaigners love campaigning at the government, but what I've seen is that the government's terrified. Well, one, they don't know very much. You know, that's what people in the room do. So for their job is a lot about finding those people and facilitating. But two, they're terrified of unintended consequences. And so when we talk about, say, process and my process of getting a business going and creating change, in 2020, the end of 2020, I launched the Accessible Lettings scheme. And so that was about working with the the private rented sector. It was about working with agency. And when I first went to the government about it, they thought, yeah, great, this is great, love the work you're doing, but we're not gonna support it. And for me, I was very lucky. The guy who headed up lettings at that point, I'd worked with him because I come from a state agency 20 years previously, so he was already kind of responsive to what I was doing. And the point of this scheme was to be very pragmatic, to find the lowest, what was the smallest thing that the industry had to do in order to make the search process easier for older and disabled people. And we delivered this great system, and then I'm now working with Rightmove, Zoopla, and On the Market, and a number of great agencies, large and small. And what's interesting is now there's a raft of changes going through the sector, and I've been able to piggyback on top of that, and the government are now behind it and supporting it with the changes which are going through. And so I kind of want to really finish just by saying that, this thing of champions and finding those people, actually within this scheme and making this scheme, which is transformational, it's really big news when one considers there's over 20,000 agents in the UK, is that actually in building the momentum, I can name 4 champions who really delivered over the odds, and 3 of them are from agency and 1 of them's from a government department. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please do ask.
What learning do you think there is from what you've done for the social rented sector, where enabling people to access accessible housing is such a problem at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. So as far as accessibility and inclusion goes, it's tenure blind. But this is why I find this work here encouraging. Everyone's starting to talk about it. So the social sector, I know people who are trying to get this scheme as something similar going, and I think they've all been slightly perplexed that I've come so far in such a short space of time. One of the advantages I have is that I come from the property industry. I've been an estate agent. It took me 18 months to be able to say that without flinching. I've been an estate agent. I've been a developer, both residential and commercial. I've been a landlord both in the UK and Germany, and I've worked with a startup property fund. And so I've done lots of things quite badly, but I've understood, I'm a generalist, I understand how they fit together. And so the first thing that a lot of disability campaigners do is they make it all about disability, and it isn't. It's about people and it's about homes. And when you try and make it about disability, you reinforce the negative stereotype that disabled people need different, they have to be treated specially. And it's not a narrative I buy into, it's unhelpful. We have people, and people need homes, and the more we just have people, the more things work. So the first thing is, if you want to implement a property solution, you have to understand the constraints that the property professionals have. Remember, a fifth of them, at least, have got lived experience of disability. And so one of the reasons the Knight Frank team was so amazing is they put in their own internal champions. And they volunteered to do that role because they felt so passionately about it. So now, suddenly, they were able to bring their lived experience to their workplace and make a difference for a load of people. And some of the case studies, some of the homes they've matched, with people, they're very cool stories. The other issue that the social housing sector is struggling with is, very simply, perfect is the enemy of good. Their system is the thing that they're trying to get off the ground is so complex, it's not off the ground. They won't ever get it off the ground. It's not possible. And so with me, for example, when I had a conversation with Zoopla, I could tell, at the beginning of this second call, they were like, oh God, here he goes. I'd got, back-end website people, front-end website person, an account manager, and they're like, okay, great, Guy, what do you want? So I gave them 3. We can't have a wheelchair accessible, wheelchair friendly, or accessible tick box, because you can't expect a property expert to know what the hell that means. And in any case, we don't have a housing supply that includes that. So with me, I was like, no, I'm very clear. We're going to have 3 fact-based things. One is step-free access, includes lifts, ramps, and level threshold. One is wet rooms or flat floor showers, because that's a deal breaker for many people. And the third is what we call lateral living, which is living room, kitchen, bathroom, and at least 1 bedroom on the entry level, because as much as we want to include homes that do work, we don't want to exclude homes that do work. So I rented a house with an upstairs bedrooms. My wife thought it was amazing. She had her own domain. But we had the living space downstairs, and it had taken us a year to find that house. So understanding the property people's constraints and keeping it simple. And so going back to the Zupa conversation, I gave them these 3 things, and they said, oh, good, yeah, God, we can do that, great. From the tech side, it's also understanding the tech. It's easy to do. Great, what else? I said, no, that's it. And they looked a bit like, really? But we could, and then suddenly they started coming out with all these amazing ideas. And I'm like, yes, but that's too complicated. If you start complicated, you set everyone up for failure, because the agents don't know how to use it, the property searchers don't know how to use it, everyone gets confused, they all start going to different standards. I'm about standardizing inclusion across the industry. It's not competitive. The only competitiveness is how well you do it. The actual facility is, so I'm bringing everyone up to a basic benchmark, which does loads of things. It says to people, 1, we're doing it. You say to employees, bring your lived experience to work, we value it. It's important for our commerce. You say to applicants, the property searchers, yeah, we recognize that you're there and we're looking for your needs. You say, oh my goodness, 3 checklists, 3 filter boxes on the portals. Well, that's amazing, we can collect the data. And so that then starts influencing people, because if Rightmove sells data to a big house builder saying, God, who knew that, I don't know what the numbers will be, that 33% of people want a wet room, the number of people searching for a wet room is growing over time, we have a trend here. Suddenly the house builders are going, God, that's brilliant, we've bought this information, we're going to do something about it. They think it's their idea. And the other thing is, if you put a simple turning circle on every floor plan, and I've been asked this, where should we put them in? I'm like, no, you do beautiful, like beautiful in property sales, let's stick to it. But if you have 1, it doesn't much matter whether it's in the bathroom or whether it's in a central hallway. And if you can't fit it in, fine, don't fit it in. But then it just starts being there, everyone sees it. And once or twice they might ask, what is that? And then suddenly accessibility and inclusion is it's just a thing, we just see it, it's just there. And so we understand it. And so it's quite subtle, but this scheme was absolutely central to my pathway of, there's no point in me talking to developers, it's a complete waste of my time at the moment, but it won't be soon.
Thanks for your talk, Guy. David Clare from Habitat for Humanity. I love what you're saying about trying to get it into people's psyches, and I wondered whether what you're doing now, how that can actually influence any new homes being built, to put in entry-level type provision, so that it's just, otherwise you're going to be on an endless sort of treadmill of trying to sort out homes that have not accounted for disability in appropriate ways. So I just wondered what your thoughts are about how what you're doing, whilst it's influencing the PRS, could also influence new homes being built.
Thank you. So this is this is the $1 million question, and this is where I sort of don't really go along with. Well, no, that's not true. Let me start again. Campaigners spend a lot of time saying that we need to build these homes. And recently, last year, we had this thing about M42 being the benchmark. That's absolutely great. But there's also a lot of flim-flam around, we're doing accessibility. And it's like, well, you aren't for the wheelchair users, and you're excluding a lot of people. I'm not, there's only me in accessible PRS, and I'm not going to spend my time talking to brick walls. I know it's very clear. I've had conversations. I speak to DLUC. I've spoken to all sorts of people. We're not going to solve accessible housing through planning. Like, that to me is a given. And in a way, it's really helpful to know that, because it comes back to my question, what do I have to do to influence change? There's loads we can do to influence change, but you have to understand where people are coming from and what their constraints are and where are the easy wins. And that's why, in a way, being a generalist helps me. And I'll give you an example. I've had a conversation recently with a fairly large house builder, 4,000 homes a year. I was put in touch by a funder. So again, it's the relationships and joining dots. And they were talking to me about their property types and how it works and why a bungalow sells really well, but they never sell any of the two property types, which are houses, because they've designed them to be so big. And it's part of the 1,000 reasons why people don't do it. And I'm like, well, this is a really easy win. Then you've got all these other M42 homes, which people are going to pay for. So what's the difference between an M42 and an M43 home, and what can be retrofitted, and what do we build? So a lot of accessible design is about understanding what are the future needs and occupancy so that we can do it cheaply, quickly, and not intrusively. And so if you put sort of a supporting, whether it's ply or however you do it, behind bathroom walls and in a bathroom ceiling and then tile, if you need a grab rail, you just put the grab rail in. It's already load bearing because you've got the. If you're pulling wires through stud walling, well, pull a few more wires in a few different places, because well, we could have an assisted front door or a video entry phone, so it's literally thinking ahead, and you save a ton of money. So the house building thing is actually quite easy. I say this very confidently. I only thought of it a few weeks ago, but you just have to think ahead a little bit. It's like, okay, well, if that's your problem, if that's your constraint, I know you're not going to change that for me. I know you're not going to change it for your funder immediately. You will do, because once I've had enough of a conversation with your funder, they can say, well, okay, you can borrow at this rate or you can borrow at that rate. If you want to borrow at that rate, guess what you've got to do? You've got to build it inclusively, because but before I have that conversation, it's about being relatable to those champions. So when they suddenly go, oh my God, this is about people I know. This is about my nephew. This is about my parent. They don't make the link that when they're massively stressed because they've got young kids, their parents they've just had to put them into a care home where like abuse and neglect are a thing, 150 miles away, because that's the only one that's available and affordable and accessible. They're still not joining up the links. It's like if you build a home with intergenerational, your parents could be right there, and yeah, that can be challenging for lots of people, but right there, or they could be renting, or you could have someone else's, 150-mile journey, that's a lot of wasted time. We just got to start joining the dots. We just have to say, okay, you're doing that in that silo, you're doing that in that silo, they're actually all really okay things or rubbish things or whatever things, but they're just things. Let's just hop across the silos and go, wow, God, if we take that and put it with that, and you're saying you can't do this, but it works. And what we start doing is understanding, I hate this retirement living. I hate, this ghettoizing of people. Communities have always grown up as different people within the community, and all those different people, they bring amazing things. Like someone mentioned it yesterday, that older person has been looking after your kids while you've been at work, and now everyone's moved on a little bit. They're having a fall, and it's like you've got a bit more slack because your kids are older. Well, come on, let's get you to see that doctor. Do you want a cup of tea? And or they've actually got the perspective on life and that contentment and values and understanding and insight. And when you're kind of having anxiety and it's self-confidence crisis and a black hole, it's like, well, amazing. This person will come in, sit you down and say, how are you feeling? What's going on? And this is the thing of communities. Like if you have, an autistic person, they can teach us massive amounts about anything that's theirs, because as Claire rightly said, if you've met an autistic person, you've met one person. People bring different things to the table. The problem is we've been set up to fail. And so for me, the radical thing is taking it back and owning it and going, well, okay, what does it look like? It's asking the questions. And like I hate labels, but I love people. And I just think there's this amazing thing that as soon as we start talking to each other and asking each other questions, magic happens. Great, they're clapping next door and everyone's hungry. So I think what we ought to do is you go next door, we'll bring the next crew in, and my details are here. I love talking with people. I can do it Zoom, can do it in the room. Come and talk to me. Because
questions. So, Angela.
You said there was a moment when there was a ping for those individuals and those organisations. What was that? What was that?
Sorry, a moment when there was a...
When they suddenly changed and they thought, yep, this is a good idea, we should stand behind this and we should support that. What was the key for them to change that view?
Which individuals?
So you're saying we got a number of estate agents.
Oh, yes.
That, what was it that made them change their mind to think, actually, we need to embrace this and we need to be a champion?
So the agents were behind it when I first spoke to them. But so disability is a really tricky space. And lots of people are very scared to get it wrong or be exposed for getting it wrong. And there's been so many campaigns over the years saying, pointing a finger of shame and blame and saying, you must do this and you must do that. And like, these are property professionals. Like, within their fast-paced worlds, they don't know how to do this or that. And it's really, like, it's kind of terrifying being shamed for it. So for me, I've been an estate agent. It took me 18 months to be able to say that without flinching. I've been a developer, residential and commercial. I've been a landlord in the UK and in Germany. I've worked with a property fund startup. And so I was able to, and I have lived experience, 20 years in a wheelchair, but having been, almost willfully ignorant beforehand, and now it's like, wow, insight, amazing gift, like opportunity. And so it's very much about giving people something that they can do. It's about setting people up for success. And because I've got that experience, I was able to go to them and say, hey, here's a narrative that you as a human can relate to, that you as a property professional with constraints of a business can do, because I'm asking for very little. They got it immediately. There's no pushback from that. Everyone thinks agents are the bad guys. Great, there's bad agents and there's bad lawyers and there's bad architects and there's bad third sector volunteers. Actually, they're in amazing sectors. I work within the Lettings Industry Council, and the drive and the purpose to do better, to deliver better is massive. So for me, it's about narrative and also a solution that works.
Thank you. So how do you make the house builders get it? So that accessibility, we were just in the other room just talking about it should be the norm.
Yeah.
How do we translate that? So
okay,
accessibility becomes the norm on house building.
So for me, that's easy, but I can't say that it's necessarily quite fast. It will happen quite quickly. So the accessible letting scheme, we don't want a tick box that says accessible property or wheelchair friendly, because a property professional can't say what that is. They can't define it. And our housing stock doesn't have it anyway. So I've got three, you'll start to see three filters come in, property characteristics. Step-free, that's ramps, lifts, level threshold. Wet room, because loads of people, that's a deal breaker. And the third is lateral living. So which is living room, living room, kitchen, bathroom, and at least one bedroom on the entry level. And for various reasons. And what that does is now we can start collecting data. So there's lots of parts to your question, or lots of answers for it. So the first part is, if Rightmove is now collecting data that either shows 33% of people want a wet room, or there's a growing trend. Last year it was 22%, this year it's 27%, next year it's 33%. They sell that data, their data analysts. And then house builders are going to think it's their own idea. They're going to buy the data and go, bloody hell, we're going to put wet rooms in and we're going to market them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I had a conversation with a house builder recently. They're reasonable size, 4,000 homes a year. And they gave me the context to why they're not successfully selling any wheelchair accessible homes, because the clients have to ask for it. Again, we have to remember who's leading the charge here, who's responsible. And for me, there are really easy wins. If we think ahead, we can design the houses that they're building and that they're selling so that they're extendable or adaptable really easily. And then someone like Agile could come in, design the little module that fits onto them. It can be collaborative, and that's where I'm leading that conversation with them. And then suddenly we have a solution that actually it can still sit within all the constraints of people. But if you're a local authority funding a disabled facilities grant, and the person has this house and they know that literally they can buy this unit, then suddenly everything's known already. It's easy. Like, well, it's in a procurement process. It's been done before. We know the quality. We know the standard. So there's loads of ways. But context is everything. Pulling at those threads. Sorry, I chat. Yeah, I love the subject.
I'm going to cut you off because I know you're very happy to be cut off.